You're welcome to episode number 66 of the Voices of Boyle, and this week I'm delighted to welcome Jack Fallon to the podcast. At 95 years old, Jack is the oldest guest we've had on the podcast so far, and with that, obviously comes a wealth of experience and insight. Born in 1929, he carries first-hand memories of a world that has changed dramatically over the decades. He even recalls the early days of the Second World War and Ireland's stance on neutrality during that time. From his childhood in East Galway to making Boyle his home, Jack's journey has been shaped by history, education, and a deep commitment to preserving local heritage. A dedicated teacher, he has taught across Ireland, Africa, and China, witnessing the evolving of education on a global scale. In this episode, Jack shares his reflections on life, learning, and the changing world around him. It's not every day I get to sit down with someone who has lived through nearly a century of history, and it's truly a privilege to share Jack's stories with you. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Jack, thanks very much for coming on the Voices of Boyle podcast. You're not originally from Boyle, so could you share a little with us about where you were born and a bit about your early years?
Well, I was born in I call it the sheep raising area in Ireland, in East Galway. I belonged to a family of 9, and was in the primary school to Boyle through we made our way through the fields to the nearest primary school, which was called Castle French School at that time. It's called a Ballavonian school now. I would have been 4 years old and remained I would attend to that school for about, I would say, 9 years.
And so, Jack, you were born in the late 1920s, is that correct?
The late 19th century, correct.
Sorry, I think it was 1929, I think you were...
1929, I was born in 1929.
So then you would obviously then have remembered pretty well the onset of World War II back in the 1939. You would have been 10 years old.
Correct.
So maybe can you tell us how you remember being informed? Was it your parents told you that the war had started, or how did that come about that you remembered the onset of the Second World War?
The Second World War, as we were very well known to be a neutral country. So, although we were very much affected by the rationing, which was instituted by our own government.
What was that like that you can remember as a 10-year-old? Was everyone afraid? How were families impacted during that time, Jack? Can you remember?
Actually, we seemed very much detached, apart from rationing and that kind of thing, you know. Ordering of the prize cocoa, we used to. Prize cocoa. No, sorry, it was not prize cocoa. It was a bit more inferior than that. But we weren't affected, or we didn't. We entered perhaps in the bombing raids in England, but wasn't affected very much by that. And so apart from the rationing, it didn't affect us very much. We didn't take it seriously.
Yeah.
Despite the heavy and intensive bombing in England and London and Birmingham. So I'd ordered to remember when the headmaster came in and he announced, because we didn't have any radios either, that the war was over. Well, I can't say whether we were delighted or otherwise, but the war was over.
So your headmaster, Jack, informed you that the war was over that was, I think, 1945-ish. And can you remember when you found out that the war had begun? Was it your mother or father had told you that the war had started in 1939? Or how did you find out about the war starting? Can you remember?
I do remember
You
it
don't?
very clearly.
Okay,
Very
yeah,
clear.
that's fine.
Yeah, when it started,
Mm.
and that year. I remember it was harvest around the 1st of September, I think, and my mother came with the tea, the tea, and that was her news, good news, that she had heard that the World War II had begun, and that the Germans had invaded, well, was it Poland or, yeah. But anyway, that's when we had it first.
Yeah,
We thought that was actually great.
a bit of
We didn't
excitement.
say it was great news, but it was news, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And as you said, there was no radios back then, no other way of finding out. So you
No.
just, yeah.
Just by word of mouth, yes.
How did your family feel about Ireland's neutrality during the war, Jack? Was it something that was talked about?
No. It wasn't. I see they seemed to be quite indifferent. They might never know what neutrality meant at the time, you know.
Yeah.
Later, I became convinced that neutrality was it was a mistake. It was a kind of an escape from reality, or from even responsibility, because the Nazis were a very oppressive.
Right.
It was a very oppressive regime, you know.
Back, Jack, when you were a student, you said you were under the Christian Brothers, was it? You went to school.
Franciscan Brothers.
Sorry,
yeah.
Franciscan Brothers.
Yeah.
What was the educational system like back then as compared to maybe even modern days? Was there an emphasis on certain subjects, or was it like what subjects can you remember being
It was
taught?
called a Gaelic school. A Gaelic school. There were, at that time, there was a great, they seemed to have a great responsibility for the restoration of the language, which has proved not very good. And so Irish was a compulsory subject
Back in those days.
in the secondary school as well as in the national.
And then, Jack, you went to Africa during the 1960s to teach.
Exactly.
Okay, can you tell us a little about, I think it was Ghana and Nigeria, was it, that you went to?
After I had got my degree, yes. Well, it was a clergyman, yes. He was a missioner who approached me, and he said, would I be interested in going abroad? At this time, I was just married, and I said, well, where? And he said, Ghana, which was the first independent country in Africa to gain independence under Kwame Nkrumah. So I said it would be a great adventure, especially because her brother had been on the RAF and had been to that particular country. So we decided that it would be. It was only just to get away from the kind of the life in Ireland, which was rather narrow, to broaden our experiences and that. So it turned out that we spent 4 years in Ghana, then came home, and I resumed national teaching.
And how did you find the educational system in Ghana, Jack, in comparison to previous teaching roles? How did it differ? Was there a different system for education over there than you were used to?
Yes, we found there was no trouble in discipline that you would find in a primary school. There was no trouble in that. Uh, it, their whole aim was it was actually a training college, yes. And their whole aim was to get a job in the country, in the in the in the primary, in the schools, their aim was to be a qualified teacher and get a salary anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
So they spent 2 years in this particular college, which was in a place called Bogaso,
Right.
Ghana in West Africa. Yeah.
Okay. And so then, Jack, after your stint in Ghana, you returned to Ireland, and I believe it was around 1966 that you would have moved to Boyle.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And I remember your son Oliver telling me that when you came to Boyle first, you were boarding in Marion Road with there was a house, Mrs. Chapman. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Beside Chapman.
Okay.
I was. Yeah. We managed to get a house in Marion Road. In other words. Yes.
Okay. So
in a very short time. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when did you start teaching then in the Boyle St. Joseph's National School?
Yes.
What was it in? Because I remember
just after a few years where I.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you would have, prior to working in the St. Joseph's in Boyle, you probably had, I think you worked somewhere down in Sligo direction, Ballymote direction.
I did.
Yes. And then
you, 4 years there.
So then you would have obviously started working in Boyle in St. Joseph's around 71, I think, 1971 then, if it was, you came back in 66, maybe you worked 4 years in...
Actually, that school where I was employed down in Sligo, that closed down for lack of numbers. So I was without a job, so I moved in. And I think I moved to Dublin, yes. I moved to Dublin and I got a job there in a secondary school whose headmaster was Jewish. I spent about, 2 years there. Then a vacancy occurred in St. Joseph. I was told that it might be a good idea to come back to Boyle. I applied for the job there and succeeded in getting it. And that's where I spent 21 years, I think.
21, right? Because I remember, Jack, when I was in school in St. Joseph's, it would have been, you taught me fifth class, and that would have been around 1988. I remember when you taught me. So yeah, and then you retired then a couple of years after that, I think.
I was actually over 20 years in St. Joseph's in Boyle here.
Yeah. With your time in Boyle, Jack, did you enjoy those 20 years teaching in St. Joseph's?
Yes. That's a good question. A good question. I never felt myself very comfortable as a national teacher. Never. No. I always felt that it was I could never get down to their level of thinking, and in other words, I wasn't relaxed at all in before a class. And I had changed in my travels now abroad in Ghana that I changed quite a bit, you see. You got a bit more liberal there and you were used to a different type of teaching as well, So I found it hard to readjust then when I came back to the primary school in Ireland.
After you retired here in Ireland in Boyle, you then set off to do a bit of teaching abroad again. You went to Zambia for 2 years and China for a year.
Gambia first, yes.
Gambia. Sorry, yeah.
Zambia. Yeah, 2 years in Zambia. My period in China came after I retired. I decided. So I was a kind of a wanderer, I was I was that way by nature. I wanted to expand my horizon, as I say. So that brought me to China. Country I liked very much. I found the Chinese people very, very helpful and very friendly. After I was there about 2 years, yes, 2 years. So I had a rather kind of a very, I had a very, very kind of a wandering kind of life, you know. Looking through, I suppose there are characters in literature that were like me, you know.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you like you said you liked China as a country. Did you like the culture as well and the food? That was no problem for you. You like that?
I did like it, yes, yes. And, you know, almost the rest of the world would have been against their system of government, you know, which wasn't a democracy, and
Yeah.
they, there were no free elections in Ghana or in China, but that didn't affect me very much, really.
And did you have any major struggles or cultural differences, Jack, living in somewhere like China or Zambia compared to back home that you thought you found it hard to adjust, or did you just kind of take it like a duck to water?
No, I didn't. Yes, I just found it like a continuation of dealing with children or with pupils from other countries, you know. I was quite accustomed to it after being in Ghana. And I was also, I forgot to mention that I was up in northern Nigeria as well before. Yeah.
That was in the 60s, was it? I think in the
Yes.
yes, yeah,
Yes. So I was kind of quite used to exercising my whatever talents I had to teaching children from our students from other country.
yeah.
Yeah.
And when you were in Africa, Jack, did you learn any of the local languages, or did you have a few phrases after a couple of years there, or nothing?
No,
Didn't have any need.
no, I never. They didn't expect you like to have it.
Yeah.
Their main aim was to be able to speak English and communicate in English.
That's what you were there for, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So you've done quite a bit of travel back in those days, Jack, when travel, unlike it is now, very accessible and easy.
Yes.
Back in even, the early 90s, especially the 60s,
Yeah.
was a different story altogether.
Correct.
How
Correct.
was it?
There was opportunities to go to go teach in other places seemed to come very easily, and to me, I don't know why, but that was the case. So that it wasn't such a wrench then from teaching at home,
Yeah. And maybe that's, you probably found it hard to adjust back to teaching life in Ireland after being somewhere, as you said, where,
Very much.
yeah, I think that played a big part then in terms of.
That is true. You found that you were more relaxed maybe than other teachers or other teachers who hadn't been abroad.
Yeah.
More relaxed and perhaps too friendly as well, which they weren't used to.
Were you involved with the Connacht Rangers at any stage here in Boyle, Jack, in a community project?
Yes.
You were?
Yes.
Okay.
Albert Oliver was my son.
Okay.
Was a member. I had maybe studied the history of the First World War. Boyle was a garrison town. That was the chief reason why I joined. The barracks was just down from me, from the back of Marion Road there. It was there as a kind of a challenge. And so I did a bit of research on that. I found that a great experience. And then we gave us a chance to go abroad as well.
Another bit of travel.
Organised trips to the battlefields. That was marvellous,
Yeah.
and see where so many of Boyle's citizens, and I don't know how many, went over, well over 100, well over 100, I think, lost their lives out there.
And Jack, your late wife, Connie, she was responsible, as maybe you were, for setting up the Boyle Citizens Information Office back in, I think, 79. That's correct, isn't it? Connie was involved in that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, she was.
She was, I think, a founding member. I believe I read somewhere that she was involved in that. Had you a part to play in that as well, or was that solely kind of Connie's?
That was her field.
Right, that was her. Yeah.
That was her field. That was her area.
And she also was played a big part in King House not getting turned into a car park, I believe, as well at some stage. I heard that many times, that there was Connie and a few others who were involved in preventing King House to be knocked and turned into a big multi-story car park or something like that.
Yes.
Which is...
yes, they did have an organisation here to preserve the King House, which was like in danger of being knocked down. I think they had plans. The local council had plans to clear the building altogether and cut off your link with the past.
Yeah.
Which didn't happen, thankfully.
Thankfully, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which was restored.
And it's a fine building down there now, with the different exhibitions, the Connacht Rangers room and all that. It's a fantastic asset to the town. It really is. So we've Connie to thank for that, really. You also do a lot of writing.
Writing.
Yeah. You contribute to newspapers. I think Tony Conboy told me you have submitted articles to RTE Sunday AM program. I can't remember the name of it.
Yes. I had a number of broadcasts.
Yeah.
I had I suppose I had less than 10 anyway, but I was very interested in that program. It was called Sunday Miscellany. Yeah, Sunday Miscellany. Or 10, but then that didn't last that long, But I used to write a lot to the Irish Times, the Irish Times, the letters columns to the Irish Times.
And do you still write, Jack?
I do, but not as much. No, they don't accept as much as I.
Yeah.
I think the editors have you for so long, and then they stop printing them, Yeah. So, but I have quite a collection of letters that I wrote to the Irish Times, and I found it useful for, keep in touch with things.
Do you have any particular pieces or styles that you've submitted, Jack, that stand out as ones you really like? What kind of articles or pieces would you submit to the Irish Times and the RT Sunday? What kind of pieces were they? Historical pieces or contemporary affairs?
Contemporary affairs.
Right, okay.
And your views on these.
Okay.
On whatever has been proposed, whatever became an issue in the country,
You've been living in Boyle now for 60 plus years, really. You've been in Boyle since the 60s, mid 60s. You came to Boyle first.
66. Yes.
Yeah. What, if you could describe Boyle in a few words? What would those words be to describe Boyle?
I found it a very agreeable, a nice place to live. On the whole, yes. I found the people very friendly on the whole as well. And then I regard it as a very historical town, you know.
Of course. Yeah.
Been involved in wars overseas and that. And then, of course, later when the Boyle Arts Festival was set up, I was quite interested in that as well.
You've seen a lot of change in the world we live in now, from your early days to, modern days. Technology has changed. Societal views on different affairs have changed.
Yes.
What, in your opinion, would be the biggest change, Jack, that you've seen over your lifetime here in Ireland?
I think the biggest change would be concentrated on schooling. I think that is so, you know. That's the secondary school there has brought about a big change, I'd say, in people, especially younger people, has made them more aware of what's going on in the world, and it enables them to think what's in their minds as well.
Yeah.
It opens, in other words, opens up their minds.
And Jack, before we finish up, is there anything you'd like to touch on that we already haven't? Is there anything you'd like to talk about? Anything else before we finish up?
It's something that's very material, but nevertheless important. There's no public. There's no there's no public supply of water here. No piped water. You are dependent on a well. And I'd like to a few. I had experience of a few summers when there was very little rain, and your well goes dry, you know. I think public supply of water would be my wish, would be my wish to safeguard you against drought and things like that, you know.
Yeah.
So a public supply of water to be extended out, let's say, a certain length from the town, you know. Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of wraps it up, Jack. I think I've touched on all the different points I'd like to have talked to you about. So thank you very much for sharing your stories, some of your life memories. And it's been an honour and a pleasure to sit down here with you in your house and record this episode for the Voices of Boyle. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.